Good evening. Welcome to our midweek, and this is for parents of children from 0 to 10 years. Of course, if you're here for another, or you have kids in another age group or don't have kids yet, you're definitely welcome to stay and listen in. And we have interviews with Tony and Melanie, but I just wanted to read a scripture before we get underway, and then also a quick announcement. And so, in Ephesians chapter 6, beginning in verse 4, it says, "Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." Now, of course, that is really applicable to both mothers and fathers, right? And that's what tonight is all about, is helping us to, as parents, to really bring our kids up in the training and instruction of the Lord. And Tony and Melanie are going to share from their experience, and we're going to really benefit from that a great way. Just want to quickly mention that this Saturday at 7 a.m. at Rotary Park, we're going to be having a prayer time. And of course, there's so much going on right now in our country, from COVID to all the racial tension. And then, of course, people may have lost jobs and so forth during this time. There's a lot to pray about. And so I want to encourage you, let's make use of one of the most powerful weapons that God has given us. Let's come and be there for 7 a.m. at Rotary Park this Saturday.
Hey, good evening, church. Welcome to our midweek service. We're really excited. We have Andrew and Corinne Elliott. Give a wave there, Andrew and Corinne. There we go, our youth in the family there, teen leaders. We have Illumide and Carolyn Faulkner, who lead our Reach ministry. Yes, we have Mark and Ruth King, which is me and my lovely wife. And we have very special guests, the leaders of the Ottawa Church of Christ, Tony and Melanie Singh. Very excited to have you guys. For the next 2 weeks, we are going to be talking about parenting, and we are going to try to mine the wisdom that Tony and Melanie have by asking them some questions. But before we do that, I'm going to have Andrew Elliott lead us in a prayer, and then I'm going to tell, I know what you're waiting for, church, my 2 jokes. We're going to do that, and then we'll get into it. So, Andrew, let's have a prayer. I'll tell my 2 hilarious jokes, and then we're going to ask away with Tony and Melanie. So go ahead, Andrew.
God, thank you for this time to gather together and mine the things for wisdom. God, I pray that you give us wisdom in how to lead and parent the youth, God, in your church. I pray that this is a very productive time where we can get some quick tips, some insight, and some spiritual wisdom on how to be better parents and leaders of our families. Thank you for the wisdom that you provide with the spiritual people in your kingdom, God. Thank you for this family. We love you, and in Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen. All right, before I get into a little bit more of an introduction to Tony and Melanie, the real reason you all came to midweek to hear these great jokes. All right, here we go. My first joke is this: why don't melons get married? Because they can't elope.
Love it.
Wow. I guess I have to say that. I guess she has to say that.
Why do you never write with a dull pencil? Because it's pointless.
It's good.
There's truth there.
Good job. That's a good
All right. Okay. So Tony and Melanie, Ruth and I have known them for. I've known Tony and Melanie for over 25 years. Yeah. They knew me when I was a campus student in Vancouver, Canada, and then in '96 I went to Toronto to train in the full-time ministry under their leadership. An amazing time. They have 3 grown-up children, all married. Justin, their oldest, Ashley, their second, and Michael, their youngest. And Michael just graduated from university. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Just before we get in, all three were married in the last year. Is this correct?
Yes, over a 13-month period, 3 weddings.
Wow.
Awesome. And one of the things that I have always loved is and respected and admired is not only the character of your children, but your relationship with them. I see it as they're very close to you. So before we get into the questions, I just wanted to ask, can you briefly give us maybe just the personality types of your 3 kids? Just, maybe kind of, but this particular class is going to be for parents 10 and under. So maybe kind of look at what kind of kids were they like? How would you describe, Justin, Ashley, and Michael as babies and young children?
Okay. I'll share from my perspective a little bit, and then we'll have Melanie share. So Justin was a kid who was easily pleased, didn't have to have many friends. If he had 1 or 2 children, friends, he was fine. He was ready to go. He loved music and he loved movies, and that's what he liked to do. And Ashley, she was called the queen of the neighborhood that we lived in. Literally, we were known as Ashley's parents. And she literally, if she ran for mayor when she was 5 years old, she would have won. I mean, that's who she was. She would do everything to avoid discipline. I mean, she would do whatever. Michael was the one who absolutely tried to show that he could defy mom and dad.
Right.
I mean, he was absolutely, he wouldn't, as Ashley was trying to avoid being disciplined, Michael wasn't. That's what they were like.
I think the only things I would add is that, Justin was, when he was young, very hyper. He had a lot of energy. And so keeping him, learning and teaching him to be still and focus on something was always a little bit of a challenge. But he's definitely an introvert. He's somebody that through being a disciple has learned to be a giver of himself, but that was definitely always a challenge for him. He loved being alone, loved playing on his own, but he's also a very sensitive and deep person. So engaging in deep conversations with him started when he was really young. Like Tony said, Ashley, oh my gosh, yeah, keeping her social calendar filled was very difficult. And she's obviously an extrovert. I think one of the things about Ashley is that Ashley was the outwardly compliant child, inwardly rebellious, and so you never knew. And so when she was young, parenting her was not as difficult because she knew what her older brother went through and was like, nope, that's not going to be me. So she definitely had that characteristic. And then Michael is definitely an extrovert. Michael, I think the thing about Michael from a very young age is he's always been determined. Like he's always known exactly what he wants to do. And I think he would get into trouble when exactly what he wanted to do was not what mom and dad wanted him to do. And so it's served him, in a great way as a Christian. But I think when you're trying to mold character into somebody and you're trying to mold Jesus into somebody, you can have your conflicts with a child like that. But yeah, Michael was also a very happy kid. He although he was very focused, he was that kid that got up in the morning just happy. Him and Ashley both, they would just get up and be completely happy. Maybe that's the extrovert personality, but that's our 3 kids.
Great. Should we start the questions? Probably. We wanted to know just a little bit about family devotionals. Something we talk about a lot in the church. So what did you guys do, and how often did you try to have family devotionals?
And we have family devotional at this age once a week, and where we would sit down and we will even break down a little bit how we will have a family devotional. And maybe, yeah. Okay, maybe you can break it down specifically how we did that, babe.
I think that's the second question.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, do you want us to jump to the second question or stay on the first one? Okay. So the second question is, what does a family devotional look like? So our kids, just to give you guys an understanding, Justin and Ashley are 6 years apart. And so between Justin and Michael, there's 9 years. So our family devotionals had to be creative. Like, we couldn't just sit and teach for extended periods of time, right? And so because when I was a single parent, Justin was 4. And so, by the time Ashley came along, he was already 6. So from the very beginning of our devotionals, they had to be, we used one scripture, and it usually was one lesson. We were teaching a concept: obedience, honesty, unity in the family. And so it was that one concept. And then we always sang songs that the kids knew from Kids Kingdom that were interactive. Like "We Are Soldiers" was one of their favorite songs, because we'd get up, and when we were old, we'd all be old and we'd be shaking around. And then we'd all be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So things that were super interactive. And then we always had a skit. And then the skits, the kids were very involved in the skits. And they loved, my kids are all actors. They love to act. And so that was the most fun, I think, part for them, was engaging physically in whatever it is that we were trying to teach. So I think that's why once a week, because it took time to think about, not just the lesson that we wanted to teach, but what we had to do to communicate that through kind of interactive sport. And there were definitely times, because Justin was a little bit older, there were times when we said, Justin, you're going to lead the devotional today, because it engaged them in a different way when one of the kids took a scripture and taught and led and whatever. So that's essentially.
I don't think we answered this question, but when Melanie and I got married, Justin was already 4 years old, and so it was great. We had a family of 3 immediately, and so it was fantastic. We really tried to hype up the fact that it's devotional time, and at this age, they were very, very excited about that.
Yeah, my kids are still very excited. When do they stop being? Did they stop being excited at any point, or?
Yeah, well, we had to change the format, and when they got older, and what shape and how those discussions evolved.
Yeah.
And so yes, we probably 11, 12 years old. It certainly changed in its dynamic.
Okay.
I think kids lose interest in this concept, I think, when they start to have their own social life, when they have things that they're doing that they want to. And I think also the second thing is that kids today, I don't know, for us it wasn't as much as I think it is for you today, but kids are so savvy today, right? So you have to be, I think, as a parent, that much more creative with what you're teaching. Our kids didn't have access to the things that our kids have. And so I would imagine as parents today, using social media, using the internet, using those kinds of interactive things are probably helpful to your kids. Our kids had us and TV and video games for a long time. So
you touched on some great points in regards to family devos. Obviously, you talked about the creativity. So it does take a little brain work. You're not just gonna, ad lib. You talked about singing, and I think it's so important that parents teach their kids to sing to God. And, they're gonna sing if we don't teach them. They're gonna be singing songs from the radio and then just kind of the skits that you did, Tony. One of the things that I felt as a dad sometimes when doing a family devo is like, when they're 1 or 2, and then you're trying to, like, kids can be fussy, And as a dad, you can, and then all of a sudden you get irritable, and then all of a sudden the family devo doesn't feel like a family devo anymore. What were the things you're doing when, like, your kid, like, you know what I mean? Like, when and you don't want it to be a yelling time, but, like, when how did you fight the frustration as a dad? And I think a lot of dads feel that when you have big families and trying to have a devo.
Generally with dads, we love to be in control. And when there's an apparent time that we're losing control, not only do we think it's the end of the world, but it also psychologically it's attacking our fatherhood. So we have to be very, very mindful that the devotionals are not for you; it's for the kid. And if you take on that disposition and that mindset, then you realize, man, them acting out, it's part of who they are and what they do. It's not the biggest thing in the world. And I think one of the things, though, if it's timely in the sense that it's not that long, because you don't really have to take that long to make a point. And that is something that's going to be helpful. But there are times, absolutely, we need to say, hey, guys, in order for us to sit down and respect each other's time, respect each other's feelings, we ought to behave in this manner. And so sometimes that would be the topic. Hey, how do we react in a group and when there are other people involved? And so I think if you go in with the mindset, this is not for me to impress upon my kids who I am, but to teach them this concept. And honestly, we don't make it too big of a deal. They're very important, but we don't make it too big of a deal. And I think that's what it is. Because the fact that there are 9 years between Michael and Justin, there are times Michael got squirrely and wouldn't like to sit with the people, but he needed to be taught that. And it's not something that's natural per se, but after a few times, he was pretty well compliant. Like, that doesn't mean every time he was, but it's a teaching opportunity.
Yeah, and I think too, I think when kids are little, right? They're being kids. They're and so incorporating it into the fun of it, because I think sometimes for us, even Justin would get annoyed with the younger kids as he was trying to listen if they were being disruptive. And Tony's one of those people that on the spot can come up with like a joke or whatever, and so if somebody was not, something like, he would be like, oh, I guess Michael doesn't want, but it was just this funny little interjection of, let's gather him back. And I think that's where I played a role. If I wasn't teaching, a point in the devotional, whatever, that's where I think I helped when they were really little, keep them steadied and focused.
And Melanie brought up something here. It was very important that both Melanie and I, at this age, led devotional. So that was just me. It was also her. That they understood that mom was not only a nurturer, but mom was a spiritual entity in the family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, no, and that's huge. I love that you said it. And certainly having you watch, particularly Ashley and Michael and Justin, but mostly I remember Michael as a baby. I remember Melanie, you were always you were a leader in the home, and I think that's so important that it wasn't, devotionals weren't you sitting back watching your husband do it, but it was really a joint effort. Let's move to discipline. Let's kind of that favorite topic that we all love, disciplining our children or training them. Let's just start with this question here. In your guys' when in your mind did you start disciplining your kids? Some people think I'm at 15, I start grounding them, or at 10 I need to start, when did you guys start disciplining your children?
And what did that look like?
Yeah, good.
We started at 6 months.
6 months, absolutely.
6 months.
Okay, 6 months. Wow. And that's and we did too, but because that's what we saw people do, and that's surprising for a lot of parents, and I want to say particularly for young parents. Can you explain a little bit what would disciplining a 6-month-old look like? Obviously, your kids did well with it, but
And why at that age too?
Yeah. When they're that young, you're teaching them ultimately that they don't hurt themselves, right? It's purely, a lot has to do with safety. When you're changing the diapers, when they're heading towards the electrical socket, when there's something that they shouldn't be climbing the table and pulling themselves up and they might hurt. And so the discipline will take different forms. We actually started spanking our kids. It's just a tap on the leg when they're 6 months old, and it's not something to really hurt them, but you're telling them this is not proper behavior, and ultimately you're trying to protect them what is good, what is not good. And obviously you have to do things in your home to make sure that they're protected, like having the right gates, the stairs, and depending on the age, and the sockets need to be covered with plastic and all that kind of stuff. But sometimes you're teaching them the idea that they need to be disciplined in some form. And like I said, we started at 6 months old.
Yeah, and I think, sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think this age, for the most part, it's moms who are doing this kind of discipline. And, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but we never disciplined our kids for something we didn't teach them. And so I actually remember, if the kids were crawling toward the light socket, like I remember picking them up, looking at them and saying, no. And I go, no. So that was my way of communicating, no, danger, don't touch. And so that was an important thing for us to make sure that there was this demonstration of this is what it looks like to not listen to mommy. And I think probably more than anything else, that concept of listening to your parents because we know better and we are teaching you things that we know. There's a book called Shepherding a Child's Heart, and it's a phenomenal book if you guys haven't read it. But it's about, not behavior modification, but really teaching the heart. And one of the lessons in there is about, your child learns to listen to God through listening initially to your voice as that voice of authority in their life. And so, that's all I was going to say, Mark.
No, that's awesome, and I love the way you guys are describing discipline. It's not a punishment; it's training. It's training how this child is to respond to you and all that. And then you kind of move to the toddler stage. And let me ask, Ruth asked what it looks like. Obviously, it's going to look a little bit different when they get to that toddler and that stage. What was your expectation of your 2-year-old, your 3? I mean, sometimes people battle. I mean, can they understand me?
Right.
Do they have the capacity? When they're 2, when they're 3, what were your expectations, and what did you spank them for? We spanked our children. It's what we saw. We thought was effective. Our kids are teenagers. Obviously, it worked with you guys. Can you talk a little bit about that young baby stage, 2, 3, 4, 5? What did you spank them for, and what did you expect?
Yeah,
That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. There are 3 areas that we spanked our children for. Obedience, meaning to mom and dad, and especially authority figures. I mean, we actually, every time we picked our kids up from Kingdom Kids, we asked, how were they? And it was not the obligatory, how were they? We wanted to know. And because, especially if that's what we were focusing on, are you listening to those in authority? It was an important dynamic. Talking about critical thinking, becoming critical thinkers, we'll address that a little later on. That was an important dynamic to our training. But when they were children, young children, that was a very, very important thing. And so 3 things: obedience, lying, and being disrespectful. Those are the trinity in our parenting that you did not want to cross. And this is how Tony and Melanie raise our kids. And so, maybe other people might have different things, but that's what we did. That's what we were trained to do. We had some people who were involved in our lives that we love and respected, and we asked them, interestingly, very similar questions to you guys are asking. And so, what would you say, babe?
For sure, I think that 2-year-olds, every 2-year-old is different, but 2-year-olds are exploring, they're learning, they're just very inquisitive. They want to do and be, and you get the occasional 2-year-old that doesn't have that sort of rambunctious. But I think one of the things, to go back to what you're training when they're little, is you're training safety, right? And you're training them. There are things that kids just don't know. And one of the things that I think kids at 2 years old, kids understand a lot, but it has to be simple. There is no room in that age for reasoning. They haven't developed that ability to reason. And so if you try to talk through something you're trying to do with that kid, you've lost them. They don't,
like, why did you do that? That type of stuff.
Or like I'll hear parents today say, honey, don't you know that mommy loves you and she doesn't want you to do that? And so whenever you do that, you're going to get hurt. And it's like, okay, that soft voice is beautiful, but in the setting, if they've done something that they're going to hurt, they're falling, that setting is not appropriate for that situation.
Right.
They need firm, stern voice. That's what they hear. That's what they respond to. That soft voice, that's great for when you're like, I so love you, honey, and you're putting them to bed.
Right.
There's appropriate times for that soft voice, but that's not, when you're disciplining, that's not the time for that voice. I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe I'm just...
I hope this is implicit, but let me make this really explicit. We never, ever should discipline our children out of anger, ever.
Right.
And if you're doing it wrong, and you need to stop, take a time out, because you don't discipline your children for your sake. You discipline them for their sake. And I think it's really, really, really important. And if you can't do that, you need to get some help doing that, because there's going to be some damage.
Yeah.
In God's kingdom, there's no such thing as irreparable damage, but there's going to be some damage that has some lasting effects if we discipline our children out of anger.
Mm-hmm. So, speaking of things we do wrong or mistakes, what other mistakes do you guys think our new parents are making today?
Well, there are a few things that we have committed, some mistakes that we have made, and certainly we see in other people, and is not being consistent. That's I tell you, because your words become empty words if you're not consistent. There are times to be gracious and merciful. There are times that we've got to be consistent in what we're doing. Okay, the major mistake is behavior modification. Melanie touched on this a little earlier, where a parent is embarrassed, and so their kid was acting up in the mall or what have you, and we discipline them because we got embarrassed, as opposed to really shepherding their hearts, and sometimes that could be a real mistake. You were talking about the expectations without training. Elaborate.
So for sure, you don't want to discipline something you've not taught, and this is where you see the difference between disciplining out of anger or embarrassment rather than disciplining the things that you know. We were always taught when our kids were younger, keep it simple. Do not have 1,000 rules. If you're disciplining the heart, that what you're teaching should be heart issues, right? Like lying, disrespectful, disobedience, those are heart issues. And if you're keeping it that simple, then, you're going to be focused. You're going to see those areas when they're not acting that way. And then other things you're going to be able to let go because they don't fall under that. And maybe it's just honing them in or whatever. But I think for sure, teaching your children before you have those expectations. I think another thing I see young parents doing today is empty threats.
Mm-hmm.
Like, especially when they're out, if you don't stop right now, we're going to do this, or we're going to go there. And it's like, if you say that, then do it. If they don't, then pack up your bags and go home. Don't say you're going to do something. I'm going to take this away and I'm going to give it to, then take the toy away and give it to somebody. Like, if you don't mean what you say, don't say it, because that's an indication that you're frustrated and you're saying it out of anger, but you don't really have purpose in what you're doing. You're just trying to control that kid in that moment. And you lose credibility with your kids.
I've actually pulled the car over.
Yeah.
The old thing, I'm going to pull this car over. Nope, I've actually pulled the car over.
And turned around and gone home.
Oh yeah, and so here's one of the things that was a good test. Not like I said, there are times I got embarrassed and I disciplined the kids and I tried to modify the behavior. It was not a pattern, but I made those mistakes for sure. But I know one of the good fruit of the way that we generally parented our kids was we had just bought a van. Okay, Michael was just born, and in 1996 there, and we're playing throwing the ball in our yard in Toronto. And Justin got real wild in the way he was throwing the ball, and I warned him. No, I didn't warn him. He threw the ball and it hit the brand new van. And he was his face dropped. And I said, son, it's okay. It's not a big deal at all. And it's like, because it's not something that I taught him. It wasn't under the big three: the disobedience, the lying, or the disrespect. And it was just a kid being a kid, and he threw the ball, and he realized, wait a minute, my parents really love me, and these are the things that really bother them. That I told them it's just a car, And so, but that there's a demonstration that you don't discipline simply because it was something that was not you deemed not proper. Train them in these areas if that's what you're going to focus on. And especially there are times that we had seasons of, okay, this is too prevalent in their lives, it's obedience, or, oh, wow, deceit is becoming part of their lives. Let's deal with this over the next. And so here's what happened. Sometimes we would discipline for something that we're focusing on and nothing else. And so let's say they were being disrespectful, but we're talking about being telling the truth. Then even sometimes during the disrespect, we wouldn't as much focus on that. In other words, they were clear expectations that we laid out for them, that this is what we were focusing on. And
That's great.
Can I just say?
That's awesome. Go ahead.
Yep. No, Mark, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. You just follow up. I was just going to make a comment too.
I think one of the things I wrote down here that I see today also that was not in our practice of discipline is at this age, negotiating with your kids, right? Like, if you do this, mommy will give you this, or daddy will give you this. I was taught, and I firmly believe this according to scripture. Kids, all of us have a will, right? And we know as Christians, to become a Christian, you have to surrender your will to God's word.
Yes.
Teaching your child to surrender their will, it starts very young.
Yes.
So we're not in a negotiation. Did you get that picture? We were in a negotiation. This is what we're doing. And I think at this age, particularly the 0 to 10 age, there is no negotiation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This is an authority relationship, and I'm exercising authority, and you may not like it, but this is the way it's going to be. There is time for that other type of parenting as kids get older, but this under 10, there is no negotiation. There are the two authorities, and that's all there is in the household. And
I think some parents are afraid to exercise authority because they feel like they have not spent time with their children to pour love.
Yeah.
So I think I see that often.
Yeah, and I watched you guys, obviously, particularly I saw Michael since birth, and what was, I love what you said about the consistency. You have a clear line, and you didn't bargain, you didn't threaten, you just said, "Oh, you touched the socket." It was it. It was passionless. It was just like you're getting the spank, and a lot of parents don't do that. And what was amazing to me when I was young and single was you had a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old that would do what you said.
Yeah,
that was the thing. It wasn't you weren't. I never saw you chase your 2-year-old down the mall. It was just one of these things. Come back here, and it's like, oh my goodness, he's coming. And so it really does work.
That's so funny, right? It's so funny. That you would never. I'm glad you noticed that. We had a philosophy. I am not chasing after you. That's not this kind of relationship. And I would always say, you come here. And it's like, if ever we begin this dynamic of me chasing, I'm losing a battle that I need to turn around real quick. And so it's very, very important.
Yeah.
And there was not an ounce of whether or not I loved my kids. There's no doubt in my mind. And so I was not punishing my children. I loved them unbelievably. And it was a conviction that I tried to do the things that I did, not flawlessly, but categorically. This is the seasoning that we parented our children, and that is with enormous amount of love. And love has many facets, and one of it sometimes it's tough.
Yeah. And I will say this about spanking, right? Spanking was our formative discipline when our kids were 0 to 5. That was like, there was no like timeouts and things like that when they entered school age. And we didn't do this with our younger child. We made all our mistakes with our older. We made all our mistakes. We did things. Thank God he's forgiven us for some of those things, but we spanked him way too late. But by the time they reach school age, spanking should not be a formative. And I think this is where
very rare
people are like, well, what about the laws, and what about, it's because spanking for those parents at 5 and 6 are still the main form of discipline. Like, that shouldn't be your main form of discipline when they're entering into school age years. It just is not, shouldn't be. I will also say with spanking, our kids, we started out with the teaching, we exercised the discipline, but after every time of spanking, from the time they were little, it was, do you know why you got a spanking? Even if they didn't understand, you got a spanking because you touched, okay? No touch. Mommy loves you, daddy loves you, kiss on the cheek, and a prayer. We always prayed after the spanking. God loves us, God forgives us, God is good. Simple prayers, but there was always that affection. And our kids will laugh about it today. They're like, Mom, sometimes you guys would say, okay, are you happy? And she'd be like, I'm not ready to be happy. Like, she wouldn't say it out loud. She'd say, I wasn't ready to be happy. But there was always that follow-up time with our kids, right? We never left our kids crying and unhappy with no reconciliation. That is biblical.
Excellent point. I mean, every single time we will go back and explain to them, and it's for both them and you. Okay, this is why I discipline. I mean, it had to be. If you cannot clearly articulate why you are disciplining your children, you should not.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Can I share a scenario? I remember one time. And this is for the parents that have difficulty.
Is it a scenario where I messed up?
You were not even in the house.
Okay, all right.
Go ahead.
No. I remember once with Michael, Tony was gone, and I had called Michael because I wanted him to come to the room to do something. And I called him and he didn't come. And I called him a second time and he didn't come. And I said, Michael Singh, you need to get yourself into this room right now. And he came into the room, and our room had a bathroom. He walked into the room, opened my bathroom door, walked into the bathroom, locked the door, and proceeded to throw the biggest tantrum you have ever heard. I mean, he was screaming like,
Michael.
yes, just screaming.
That is Michael.
That's Michael. And so I'm sitting in my bedroom, and I went from 0 to 10. If you know me, I'm not an outwardly angry type of person. I don't have angry outbursts. I went from 0 to 10, and it scared me so much that I was that angry that I turned around, got on my knees, and I said, God, help me, because this kid is going to drive me to murder. Like, I literally was that.
And thou shalt not murder.
Yeah, I prayed to God. I prayed. And I just was like, God, he needs discipline, but I can't discipline him in this state. I need your help. And God, prayer got me calm. And then I went to the door and leaned into the door and I said, Michael, if you don't get out of this bathroom right now, God alone help you. And that voice, and of course my voice was louder than this because I had to get above his screaming. And all I heard was, came out. And I said, do you know what's going to happen? And he said, yes. And I said, go to your room and wait for me. But that, it's an example of like, I was angry enough to do something really ugly because I'd lost control of myself. But you can get control. You can say, no, this is not okay. What I'm about to do or say is not okay. But I need to get in control, and I don't need to wait for Dad to come home. I need to get into control, and I need to deal with this situation.
Awesome.
Right.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate everything you're sharing. We have a almost 9-month-old, and she seems to find every cord in the house and wants to put it in her mouth instantly.
Of course.
She has toys, everything she could possibly want.
Yes.
The outlets and cords, surge protectors.
Yeah.
That's the toy that she wants. So
Your cords in Michigan are coated with sugar, right? Aren't they?
Yeah, I think they are, because that has to explain why she wants to eat them so bad. So yeah, I appreciate what you were saying about consistency. A little bit more harder questions. But how did you guys navigate the birds and the bees conversations with your kids? I think that can be a super scary and nerve-wracking conversation to have with children. So how did you guys go about doing that?
Well, we didn't have any pets in the house, so is that what you like? Well, first of all, there are a lot of books that are out there that are very helpful. I mean, Christian based, and so there's that. Here's some principles that we had. It's important to have age appropriate. So at different age, you have different conversation. It's not a one and done thing. Okay, it's not what we do in terms of teaching our children, and so they're age appropriate. Books that are out there. We had some people involved in our lives that we talked to who really navigated us through this time. And so we really turned to some books. We sought help went to talk to them, and it depends on the genders. Obviously the discussion, even the age of being able to understand some of this stuff. And here's, this principle is in every area of parenting, but specifically it's important. Do not parent out of fear. If you teach your children properly, they're going to respond. They at least are going to understand. And so we don't have to be panicky about issues that come up. It's amazing the right teaching. I mean, when the kids are gone, and we just said, you know what, we've done what we can.
Mhm.
And now let's see what we have taught and what it's like. And so
And I think one thing, you know, I don't know if you guys read stories to your kids when you go to bed, but I remember specifically Sarah Falushko. She was one of the elders' wives in the church. She is an educator. That's just her mind, right? She found these books that started when the kids were like 3 and 4. They were super young, but they were completely age appropriate. And so it was not like we're going to have a talk on the birds and the bees when they were super young. It was like, this is our story we're going to read. And it was, when they were young, we were both a part of those stories. As they got a little bit older, like 7, 8, 9, I never engaged with the boys at that age on talking about the birds and the bees, because that's embarrassing for a boy or his mom. They get older, and as they get older, then that can change in a relationship. But Tony also didn't have that conversation at a certain age with our daughter. And so we waited for them to get much older before we engaged that way with this particular topic. And so I think that's where we started. And then as they got a little bit older, it was gender to gender, particularly when I think, boys especially are in that age where they're just realizing they're a boy, and they're awkward. It's not comfortable for them. And, people may not agree with that, but we just felt like, and again, every kid is different. Some kids are going to be okay talking about it, and some kids are just going to be awkward, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. So I think I just want to ask, just another question here. What were some boundaries that you guys had in regards to sleepovers? When your kids want to go over to a non-Christian's household.
Good question.
At this age, very limited. And as a matter of fact, we need to know the parents extremely well if that were going to happen. And Melanie and I have racked our brains how many times that happened. Now, we were part of large churches, and so they had a lot of friends within the congregation. And so, but it was something that we did not want to expose them to something that could be potentially dangerous. And I'm not talking falling off a jungle gym. I'm talking about bigger issues. It was not a practice that we had. And if it did happen when they were a little older, we had discussions with the parents. And it was very clear what our expectations are, type of movies, whether or not, at an older age, whether or not drinking is a permissible thing. Very, very clear. It's not like, I hope they do. They seem like good people. Yeah. That's not how we parented our kids in regard to sleepovers. And not spending time, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, great, awesome. But sleepovers takes a different dynamic altogether.
I think too, just so you know, like our boys when they were little never asked. I can't even remember them asking for sleepovers. It was our daughter that was the one that was like, gonna sleep over, and especially because girls would have parties, birthday parties, and then a sleepover after the birthday party. And so that I can't remember. I forgot to ask her, but I couldn't remember if when she was super young, we did that. We let her do it under 10. I know we started letting her do it when she was older, but I don't remember under 10. I can't think of a time when we let her do that. Just because, again, it's just it's not a good thing. There's just so many variables that you don't know about, right?
Right. The friend could have an older sibling. It could have an uncle come over, and I know from my boys, I was always trying to be protective of what they saw visually, and there could be a soap opera that's not, just something that I don't want my son to see. So we were the same with our boys as well. So, gosh, it feels like we could ask you guys questions all day. We should have made this series of 4 or something like that. But super appreciate you guys for us allowing to mine your wisdom there. Love you guys a lot. And like I said, my wife and I had the privilege as single people to watch you parent, and it really was a beautiful thing, in my opinion. It was wonderful to see kids being trained in the Lord. And so thank you guys, and really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Guys, thank you.
Thank you so much.